Over the past 2 years, Nigerians have faced key economic challenges. Prices for food, fuel, and basic necessities went up, making it harder for families to afford what they need. Now, many point to the removal of fuel subsidy and the unification of the exchange rate as a twin peak that started the downward slide. Policies that unlocked different shades of pressure for Nigerians. The government has continually appealed for understanding, promising that these pains will be short-lived, even as they try to address the issue. As the year unfolds and the country looks optimistically into the future, what should they expect? More cloudy days, or is there hope of sunshine? This evening, we speak with the CEO of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Dr. Tayo Adulujo, on these and other issues. Thank you very much for having us in your office and accepting our invitation for an interview.
Oh, it's a pleasure. The most watched channel on the continent deserves our attention.
We appreciate that.
And then, of course, your brilliant program also deserves.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to your contributions on it. And I would like to start, maybe you could give us a rundown, your organization.
Okay. Well, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is a 27-year-old Nigerian-owned, Nigerian-funded, Nigerian-inspired, Nigerian-supported, private sector-led think tank. It was founded 30 years ago, really, in 1993. So with the first Nigerian Economic Summit. The summit, which is where we get our name, Nigerian Economic Summit, NESG, where we get NESG,
yes.
The group, which is the organization, is the longest unbroken public-private dialogue between business leaders, government and policymakers on the continent that has focused on one subject, the economy, for 30 straight years, actually 31 years this year. And the summit is built on evidence. What was agreed in 1993 was that when public and private leaders get together to discuss the Nigerian economy, the economic scorecard, the data, should be the foundation.
Now, I'm interested in how you get your data. You said your work is primarily based on data.
Oh, so NESG plays 4 roles: watchdog, dialogue partner, intervener, and connector. Our watchdog role is an accountability partner role with government. To fulfill that role, the evidence is everything, because that was the agreement in Summit 1. Now, if you're going to generate the evidence, it means you're speaking to everyone that is a data owner. So the NESG is deeply vested in something we call the National Data Accountability Framework. Who is collecting the data? Federal, state, and local. Is the person collecting the data? What is the quality of the data the person is collecting? And then how can we have access to that data? So that's something since our inception we do, because that's step one. So for example, we have a very deep relationship with the National Bureau of Statistics. We have a very deep relationship with most statistical authorities at state level. If you likely generate administrative data in Nigeria, we talk to you a lot. So we have a research directorate that oversees this work. It's led at the governance level by a National Economic Advisory Council of maybe the most brilliant economists in Nigeria. They set the research agenda, which must be independent of politics or business interests. And the research directorate conducts its own research, which means we go out to the field and collect our own primary data.
Okay.
So for example, run the Business Confidence Index on a monthly basis, which is a survey we do within markets and business to get a pulse of the business environment. But we also use secondary data because, of course, we are not the official statistical authority of Nigeria, so we have a deep relationship with the NBS. And in the last decade, the NBS has, decade plus, the NBS has given us a kind of relationship where we I think we've earned the right to look at the raw data of NBS on an ongoing basis. And that has created almost a mutually beneficial relationship. So if you've been following the media, even in the validation of the rebased economy data, the NESG has hosted several workshops to, give the NBS a platform to expose the data to critique, to technical analysis, etc. So that's all our data is. We have primary sources of data. So, for example, you look at the tax reform, the Tax and Fiscal Reform Committee of the President. The baseline data on citizen perception was data that the NESG generated for many years on citizens and corporate perception on taxation. So we do primary data collection ourselves, but we also leverage country statistical and administrative data to do our research and our analysis.
So if I was you've said a lot about that. But if I was to now ask your opinion, because there's this perception that we are alien to data in Nigeria.
What I will say is that there is an incredible amount of work to be done to build the data ecosystem to plan Nigeria the way I would want. But there is enough data in Nigeria to make the kind of policy decisions to get
quality data?
Well, I would say modest data. So for example, we vetted the national surveys that were the last 4 years that have been precursors to the rebasing of the Nigerian economy. A lot of very deep work done in making sure they are statistically representative of the population, etc. Of course, it's not the same thing like a census. Surveys are not census.
Yes.
And we are still a strong believer that Nigeria should pursue a full census. But from a statistical integrity point of view, we think a lot of really good work is done by the NBS to collect data through the survey methodologies. We do think that the NBS is one of the most underfunded public institutions in Nigeria. And if we want the NBS to collect better quality data, breadth, what in statistics you call it, an excellent breadth and depth of data corpus, it means that you need to do the work of funding it better. And so one of our most consistent advocacies is that we can better fund our National Bureau of Statistics than we have done today, and then retool and reskill the workforce, the statistical workforce, because of course data science and data analytics in the world is radically changing. We're in the era of big data, AI, and when you're dealing with this scale of changes in the data economy, you want your statistical authority to be transforming at that pace. And so I'll say a lot of work still needs to be done. Now,
you've spoken largely about the federal.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you get data from the states.
Yeah.
Is that reliable also?
It's a struggle. Sometimes, like I said, with the states, we go and collect our primary data also. We also have a deep partnership with other data collecting bodies that conduct surveys, the World Bank, IMF, FAO, like I said, administrative data, offices of accountant generals, of budget offices of the states, ministries of budget and economic planning. Some states have very mature statistical agencies of their own at state level. Many states struggle still with this. In fact, this is one of the reasons why we are nudging the NBS to, as part of its mandate, complete the work on state economic data. So state GDP calculation, for example, is something that even up till just last week, we're still, urging and inspiring and, supporting and promoting the NBS to go into that area also, because when you look at GDP data at the federal, it would be nice to see. Recently, Lagos released the data on its GDP size, and then of course, the question lots of economists ask is that, first, how did Lagos collect it? Second, how do we compare it to other states? If you alone are about I think it was something in the environs of $230 billion GDP.
Okay.
But of course, those automatically raise questions. So, like I said, we think that there can be a higher level of national data accountability. And we must solve this problem. To plan Nigeria, the Nigeria of our dreams, we need to invest in national data accountability, and that is the collection, the adequate storage, the accessibility of the data to you and I and citizens, the analysis of the data, and then of course the control, because some of the Nigerian administrative data, even the ones that we need for economic growth, like national identities, are in silos. Today, very likely your data, your biometric has been collected by a few people.
Yes.
ID card for driver's license. International passport,
Yes.
and NIPSI has collected it for your NIN ID. Telcos have collected it because you wanted to buy INEC banks. And then, all these guys are holding all your biometric data in different data islands. And so the question of the future, especially with data, to plan Nigeria is, when are we going to integrate all these systems together into one cohesive system, or do we create a prime system that all the systems are now a subset of? That's a big question to answer. And then, of course, you can be discussing statistical accuracy where when 20 million plus childbirths in the last 15 years have gone unregistered.
Is that confirmed that they're not ready?
Yeah, they have no birth registration. And that's something that UNICEF, even the Ministry of Women Affairs, Health will confirm. Now, this has happened for many reasons, shocks in communities, disruptions in our social context, etc. But at the end, you have, if you think about it, children. You're trying to solve the problem out of school children, but I don't know the child exists. I'm a Nigerian, I don't know the child exists. Of course, that distorts the statistical system by a significant degree. And so we are very interested, and a big part of our advocacy, both in health here, is how do you accelerate birth registrations in Nigeria? Because, of course, we all know that our birth rate is high, but if I can't register the children that we're giving birth to, how do I plan school? How do I plan vaccination? And so you can see where this can become a huge deviation for the sake of development planning, social protection programming, to now reach this children, or even the mothers of these children, because part of the problem is that if the mother is vulnerable and is unable to be reached for birth registration, or does not even have an education to understand the purpose of birth registration, then we've created a cascade of social problems that you can. I mean, between there and the deep blue sea, you can see how vast that problem might be.
When I planned this interview, I didn't plan we were going to go into this, as interesting as it is, but at least it sets the foundation for where we want to go. Because what I want to understand from you is, looking at the economy right now, where do you see Nigeria standing?
So I think that when you look at the Nigerian economy in March 2025, that Nigeria is still at an inflection point. We are transitioning in a stabilization phase of economic transformation. And let me explain what that means. When we discuss economic transformation, a simple definition is that the size of the economy is growing, but it's growing with breadth and depth. And this is one of the areas where my colleagues in macroeconomics get on the nerves of media, community members like yourself, because when we say the GDP grew, people say, hey, but nobody felt it, right? Because not all growth is immediately visible in its breadth and debt. You have to grow in a particular way.
Does all transition mean growth?
Yeah. Well, transformation means growth with depth, and depth is an acronym.
Okay.
DEPTH. D for the growth must create diversification, enough diversification to make the economy resilient from shocks. Not our type of growth, which has been oil-led. So every time oil catches cold, all of us start to sneeze, right? The second is export competitiveness. When your growth has export competitiveness, it means you can continue to generate revenues to support that growth. If you look at our exports, oil is the lead revenue gainer. And when oil shrinks in any way, prices, the shocks. In fact, the last two recessions were direct transmission from oil shocks, right? Then you have P for productivity. When you have growth with productivity, it means you're putting more people to work. It means that manufacturing and key sectors, the utilization of their assets that converts inputs to final product is high. And that's key. And we need productivity in manufacturing, productivity in services, and productivity in agriculture in Nigeria. Then you have T, and T is for technology transformation, right? When you say economic transformation, technology is a fundamental driver of economic transformation. And last, you have H, the human well-being. You know, you can have growth without human well-being, but what we say is growth with depth. There's diversification, export competitiveness, productivity, technology transformation, and human well-being. So that's NESG's definition of economic transformation. GDP growth with depth. Since 1999, we've never experienced growth with depth. We've experienced growth.
Yes.
The first decade of coming into democratic governance, we even pursued double-digit growth. In fact, there was a year we hit 15-point-something GDP growth rate. So we've grown before exponentially, you know, high growth, etc., driven by large oil revenues, strong liberalization, strong privatization programs. But in the first decade, the growth didn't translate to jobs. If you remember back then in 2010, 2011, we used to discuss something called jobless growth. And so if you remember when that's between President Obasanjo that prosecuted higher growth segment in the last 2 decades. Yes. And then when President Yar'Adua and President Jonathan decided discussing jobless growth and creating jobs. And if you remember, the hallmark of President Jonathan's administration agenda was to pursue economic transformation. If I called it the transformation agenda, and the idea was grow with massive creation of jobs and opportunity. And when we pivoted to President Buhari's change agenda, his argument was, grow, but grow in such a way that we build resilience at home. We decided to score self-sufficiency in the foods we eat and in the foods that we can produce for ourselves and all of that. All these are elements of economic transformation, but we've never had growth with depth, you know, with diversification, export competitiveness, you know, productivity, technology transformation, and human well-being happen simultaneously. Now, when this government came into power in 2023 May, it was dealing with first 8 years, where in the 8 years, there were 2 recessions, one driven by oil prices being lower for longer, one driven by COVID, and a pandemic in between. And the country had borrowed its way through those crises. So you had a huge deficit, a huge debt burden, and of course, you had all of that, plus an inflation accelerator triggered by trade restrictions, FS restrictions due to, you know, a multiple exchange rate window, etc. A size of the PMS subsidy burden that was almost the size of the Federation's annual budget. And if you were the president taking over, no option was naturally easy. And so, of course, when President Tinubu decided to implement his twin macro reforms of subsidy removal of PMS and unification of the exchange rates, right? Somebody said he should have picked one or the other, you know.
Yeah, that's the argument, that he took on too much too soon.
Yeah. Well, this, by the way, for 1 year before President Tinubu came into office, even the IMF and the World Bank could not agree about whether you pursued something called the concurrent approach, which is implement both of them at the same time. Or the sequential approach, implement one before the other. Now, with the sequential approach, you couldn't even get both of them to agree which one should come before the other one. So if you are a head of state listening to everybody, at some point, confusion would have hit you. But I think beyond the choice of implementing either of them, you remember that in 2023, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group held a political dialogue with each of the top three
yes, I remember that.
runners for the office of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Very interesting that all three of them agreed that subsidy must go. And all three of them agreed that the unification of the exchange rate was an imperative. So I don't think between, His Excellency President Tinubu, His Excellency Atiku, His Excellency Peter Obi, that there was any disagreement about these two things being good for us. I think all of them were whoever won was going to deal with the dilemma of how to do it. And I think that's what everybody has argued. It's not whether it needed to be done, it's how was it done. But anyways, how it was done was the president was given a gift from President Buhari, which was President Buhari had removed subsidy by policy default. He didn't put it in the budget, give it a time and month, it ended. And so basically, the famous said the fuel subsidy is gone, was then the trigger. If the president had an economic team in place on day one, then the fallouts of the removal would have been different. But I think that the delay in cabinet settling down, we almost went through 6 months. So the announcement was in May. Cabinet did not settle down until maybe October. That gave time for the macroeconomic effects of those reforms to gut through the economic system before real policy decisions and responses started to come. So I think the delay was a problem.
I think I would like the brief answer now to the question. How is the Nigerian economy today?
Okay, so I think the Nigerian economy is transitioning from a phase of stability to a phase of what we call consolidation.
Okay.
On the pathway to economic transformation, you go through stabilization, consolidation, acceleration, then to high growth. We spent the whole of last year trying to achieve relative macroeconomic stability. I would say some of that has now been achieved. The very volatile monetary policy environment we saw early part of last year is not the way this first quarter has been. Whilst exchange rate remains high, it's high within the regime of a stronger reserve. For example, because of course, premium that used to be foregone has now accrued in the reserves. Fiscal consolidation also stronger in the sense that your FAC historic allocations were up last year. Yeah. However, the deficit has grown. Okay, so you have something you call a disequilibrium. Because remember that to finance that deficit has costed more last year.
Sorry, you've lost me there. That deficit is caused by what?
So a fiscal deficit comes from, there's money you have from revenues, and there's a gap in your budget.
And you're now
if the gap in your budget, you used to finance it, by means where your FX was at 450, your FX is now at 160. Finance the same gap in dollar terms is going to cost you more in naira, right? So part of what you're seeing in the widening of the gap, the fiscal deficit, is the cost of funding it.
And how do we bridge that? Borrowing?
Well, we bridge it through borrowing, and that's why is historically high borrowing persists.
Okay, so let me understand this, because the understanding, I think, for a lot of Nigerians that we were not, or this administration is not borrowing as much as the last administration borrowed. In short, they came out and said to a large extent they won't borrow. Are you saying we're borrowing high to the point that we're having such high deficit?
Well, the thing about it is that even if you borrow less, right,
Yes.
in dollar terms, you convert it to your naira, your exchange, where your exchange rate is, you're still borrowing more. You're still borrowing more in naira, and so when you look at the deficit in naira, it's ballooning, right, because of the Fed. And also remember that you're borrowing at a cost of funds because of where MPR is. That is much higher than it was before. So
no, but doesn't the MPR affect only domestic borrowing?
Well, you also you're also borrowing domestic. You do run debt, bonds, etc.
Okay.
And either way, when I'm pricing credit to your country, I look at your MPR as part of the calculation. So either ways, you that's why I say there's some stability, or the disequilibrium still exists. A trade surplus has remained positive throughout 2024. GDP growth rate moved tepidly, or has continued to move in a positive direction, right? 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. I think we ended the year at 3.4 thereabout, and so you see tepid but a positive growth trajectory. So those are the gains, right? Now, the pains is that it happened in a year where there was a high cost of doing business, driven by the inflationary pressures, exchange rate pass-through on input inventory, that required, businesses to, source their capital input products from outside the country. And then, of course, a high inflationary environment in terms of cost of electricity, cost of energy, and logistics and security. And for most families, the high cost of living crisis, mostly driven by high food prices, high energy prices. So whilst these gains were going on, as an evidence that the reforms had some positive impact, the pains were going on. And anyways, the president did say to Nigerians that there would be some pains, and those pains, we saw it in the cost of doing business crisis and the cost of living crisis. As we entered into 2024, we started to see some shifts. So in the first quarter, for example, you see some critical shifts in food prices, which I expected. Agricultural GDP for the first time.
Shift positive or shift?
Shift positive.
Okay.
So you saw for the first time agricultural GDP in 3 years go back to 2.1. Agriculture was in stagnation for almost 36 months, and that's a good sign year on year that somebody did something right in the food cycle, and we need to sustain that. So where Nigeria is today is we have an opportunity to pursue the arc of the possible. Now, what is possible? It's possible for Nigeria in the next 9 months to grow at 5.5 GDP growth rate. If, one, the government having triggered all this interest in Nigeria, I think one of the ministers said to the sum of $50 billion worth of investment EUIs. If you onboard some of that money in real terms into the economy, it will immediately shift the dynamics of your reserves, expand key sectors of the economy, and drive growth. So that's something that's within the arc of the possible. Second thing in 2025 that's within the arc of the possible is that we can push that agricultural productivity from 2.1 to 4.5, so that agricultural productivity is now growing at the rate of population. You see, when your agricultural productivity is behind your population growth rate, it means you're never really producing enough food to match your population. So getting agriculture to grow back at 5% is the magic. Can we do it? Yes. If you pull some of the initiatives we've done today, we've kick-started last year, the mechanization one, the certified seed one, the maize value chain, the rice value chain, and really coordinate better in making sure that in the next wet season farming, which begins, somewhere around mid-year, in the harvest and post-harvest management of this dry season farming, which is about to end, that there's accountability, that, we are really doing the hard work, right, to ensure that those that finance, middlemen and final buyers are ramping that up. We could see really positive growth that then impacts in real terms food prices. And if you impact food prices, you change part of that pain point that Nigerians were feeling. Now, in energy, 3 parts of energy. One is the government promised for 24 months that when the Dangote refinery is up and running, the prices of PMS will come down. But we are hearing from Dangote refinery now and from the government that the deal on crude for Naira is dead or suspended.
Or they're trying to negotiate.
But they need to fix that, because there is no selling of PMS in dollars that's going to help anyone. Neither government, neither Nigerians, neither...
No, let me take you back. That one is clear, I think, to everyone. There's an energy component, because when you speak about energy, and a lot of what you've said, Nigerians still have this... they're not clear.
Yeah.
Yes, from what you're saying, it appears that the economy may be responding favorably to the reforms. Yeah. But the economy, or the lives, the daily touches, the things that touch people don't seem to be changing. Yeah. We're hearing now that there could be possible increase even to energy.
Yeah. So that's the challenge is, and this is one of the dangers with macro stories. In economics, you can have a macro story. You can have what we call a meso story. We can have a micro story. You can have a nano story. A nano story is about my wallet. I'm a worker. I've earned 40K, but where my wallet goes. Nano economics and the stories of nano economics, they matter. They matter a lot.
Oh, they do. They decide elections.
Exactly. It decides how I will go and vote. Yes. Ask the Americans.
Yes.
So nano stories matter. Now, at the level of micro stories, so your households and firms.
Yes.
These stories also matter a lot, because these stories shape markets. My consumption is based on my income. Consumption shapes market size. Market size shapes GDP of a sector, its stagnation or its expansion, right? And that determines how an industry has performed. So when we tell these stories, macro reforms, when they do not yet deliver meso, micro, and nano, we say there's a disequilibrium in the delivery. Mm-hmm. And that's the point I was making, that the big signs are there that we're in the right direction, but it's not time to celebrate. It's time to prosecute quickly, while these gains are still there, the arc of the possible in shifting meso reforms, micro reforms, and nano reforms, what people can feel. And how do you do that? On the business side, you have to ask, what does it take to get businesses back to work? You need to trigger some type of expansion in business. Now, can we do true single-digit interest rates coming from the development finance banks? We have a couple, Bank of Industry, Development Bank of Nigeria, Bank of Agriculture, etc. Can we do some of that? And whilst we're doing some of that, can we reduce some of the pain points? So, for example, this zero tariff on drugs, beautiful idea, because USAID supported funding was invested in most of these drugs coming into Nigeria, and Nigeria was basically benefiting from that. Now, with the absence of that, you now can bring in zero tariff drugs into Nigeria.
Yeah, that was.
And while you're doing that, your trade side can be stimulating investors to come and invest in factories here. And rather than bring zero dose full drugs, you bring zero dose active ingredients and manufacture the rest in Nigeria first. Because, for example, why don't I buy something that has cassava paste when I have cassava in Nigeria? Bring me the active ingredient, I come into Nigeria, finish it here by adding the cassava paste made in Nigeria here, and the drug is ready for Nigerian use, and even for export into West African countries. Now, once you start to do some of that, then trade matched with rethinking, financing, refinancing, and stimulating Nigerian businesses can get some of those things, guys in manufacturing and services, growing.
Okay, so let me take from them my understanding. From what you're saying now, it looks like we're on the right track.
Yeah.
But from your estimation, from your calculation, from the data, how long should Nigerians expect between this point and when they can begin to see, is it the nano effect?
Yeah, but so yeah, what you might call interesting. I'll take that. I'll write that down. Patent it. So the nano effect is a transmission effect. It requires coordination of markets, regulators, operators to get it right. So let me give you a good example of nano effect. So so a big meso move was crude oil sales in Naira. Yeah. It wasn't the macro move. It was a meso move. It's sector specific. Well, that triggered somewhere within the system the ability to not transfer the demand for FX to buy crude. Yes. To the macro level. That helped. Yes. Because it meant that if Dangote was going to buy crude and find dollars to buy it, he's not doing that again. He just has to buy crude in Naira and go do his Naira business. Now, what that did was automatically we saw the prices coming down, but also less pressure on the FX market. Yes. Now, once you reverse it and it goes back to buying and looking for FX, it comes back again. Which now pushes another effect. Yeah, a knock-on effect on FX. Yeah. So what happens is that the meso effect is powerful, and if you do it properly, at the end was you were driving into petrol stations and somebody who was selling to you at 1,600 a few months ago is now selling the same liter to you at 850 or 900. That's your nano effect, because that you feel on your wallet immediately. You need several policy makers in different sectoral areas to create coordinated meso effects that create wallet level effects for individuals. And this is what we call the sectoral policy coordination imperative. We're seeing too many regulators across too many sectors not coordinate in a way that impacts the wallets of Nigerians. So in fact, sometimes you wonder whether if you're running a business, maybe the cost of your business was 100 Naira. In 2 weeks, 4 regulators, by their action, raise your cost of doing business to 1,000 Naira. Now you're going to transmit that 1,000 Naira, the 900 additional cost to the product, to the market, and then the nano effect is created in the negative direction. So in 9 months of better coordination, we can see the nano effect radically change in Nigeria's favor. In fact, at the NESG, we think the arc of the possible is 24 months. In 24 months, we can be at 6% GDP growth rate. If I take individual citizen Larry, for example, citizen Larry's wallet is a combination of the debts he has, which depending on how those debts are structured are good or bad. Your assets, which is your income and opportunities, your actual revenue that comes into your wallet, and the expenses you have. Now, if citizen Larry has been impacted in such a way that because of inflationary pressure of 38%, right, his expenses is now 10 times or 5 times the size of his wallet. That's everything his assets can deliver and his revenue. He now is likely borrowing a lot to consume, right? That's if he can find to borrow. If he cannot find to borrow, then he now starts to cope. He goes into deprivation and starts to cope. The size of the coping population, I think it's put about at 38% of Nigerians in coping strategies at a household level, right? So already, expenditure outside of the wallet has expanded to the point where revenue plus asset equals I can't help. Now, depending on the level of the citizen in society, he either has enough assets to be borrowing some money to augment, or he has now maxed that out and people are chasing him around for debt, resettlement, and he can no longer cope. Now, once you reach that, you enter the deprivation segments where you're coping. And of course, just going by the World Bank, MBS data on this subject for the last 2 years, we saw more citizens fall into that deprivation, or what you call below the poverty line.
But is this not an indictment on the Ministry of Finance and the minister who is supposed to be the coordinating minister of the economy? If we're saying that there's low, what was the term you used?
Low coordination.
Yes, between some of these sectors and policy Is that not an indictment of the ministry and the work of the...
Well, I wouldn't say an indictment, I'll say a challenge.
Okay. That is not, there's more to be done.
And the reason why I say a challenge is that, unfortunately,
yes,
when you are a new government that comes into office,
yes,
the ministers, basically for the first 6 months of the government, were not in. Then you are appointed, you spend 6 months laying the roads.
yes.
It means that through, we started seeing ministerial KPIs, et cetera, somewhere in the first quarter, mid-year of last year.
That's
and
like
that.
1.5 years into the
and then the ministers are settling down to get to work. The challenge with that is that the setting up process, and this is one of the general challenges of the electoral cycle in democracy. The setting up period of government is long if the political actors do not create a set-up mechanism before they get into office. In other words, imagine if the president announced his economic team in the first 72 hours, right? And if they were confirmed by the National Assembly in the first month, then they would have had 24 months of work by now. But the truth is they've not had 24 months of work. Right. Okay. In fact, if you remember, the central bank governor did not really get into office till I think around October last year. So monetary policy reforms were unleashed in May. He got in October. So if you remember, it was in January. We heard the CBN strategy, and then we started to see CBN action and responses. Okay. So I think that coordination has started to happen. At least we are seeing much better coordination.
Well, you need to see
than we saw at the beginning of last year. This year, there is an economic team. It's meeting regularly. There's a social welfare coordination framework for the coordinating minister of health and social welfare. Also, we're seeing some more coordination. But now it's clear that because of the political cycle, there's maximum 24 months of serious work.
Not
24 months.
Not 24, because politicking will start.
Absolutely.
Maybe at the end of it.
Barring that they are politicians. So 12 months of real urgent coordination around the arc of the possible, which is coordinate sectoral policies to increase the nano effect, coordinate economic policy to increase and accelerate lowering inflation whilst driving productivity, something we call productivity-led disinflation. Okay. Right? So you're doing two things at once. You driving down the inflation levels by targeting energy security issues. So PMS, electricity supply, gas, CNG, etc. Food in terms of bottlenecks in production, in post-harvest, and logistics to market on food. And then, of course, reducing challenges that are caused by security challenges in the country and infrastructure. So I think if you take those 4 areas of targeted disinflation, whilst looking for how to unlock investments that drive private sector growth, that you can achieve accelerated disinflation that is productivity-led.
Okay, so let me take you. My time is running really fast, but I need you to talk to me about the interplay between the the states and the federal government. What is your own analysis thus far? Because a lot of times attention appears to be paid too much to the federal, and it appears the states. So from your own analysis, what is the data telling you about?
I think the data tells us that the president is very interested in federated units owning their space and getting work done. One, it shows in the timeliness of FAC allocation and the efficiency with which he has ensured that has been deployed. Second, it shows in how he even distributed the palliatives. Basically, when he announced the 500 billion palliative, he had a conversation with states about what to go to them financially, and that went to them. So I think you're seeing a lot of allowing the states to do their thing. You're also seeing a president that deeply wants to ensure that he reshapes the federating architecture to be more efficient. So it was the president and his Attorney General that went to the Supreme Court on local government fiscal autonomy, for example. Of course, that needs to be backstopped now with a clear local government budgeting and public finance management framework and architecture to ensure that there's accountability and governance at that level. And then you see the president also rapidly creating a Ministry for Regional Development, which shows that he's particular about regional competitiveness and development of Nigeria, and has now been followed swiftly by regional development commissions, Southwest, I think was Southeast, Northwest, Northeast. And so you're seeing this move to create institutions that can focus on regional transformation and then the subnational element and the local. If this works well, and if the leaders at all this level view this as an opportunity to pursue what I keep calling the arc of the possible, then it will be a very different world. Then things like the electricity bill, which basically has ceded to subnationals, the regulation of electricity supply, its promotion, its investment, and all that, should birth, sequentially, a country where the federation is strong not because of Abuja alone, but the federation is strong because the regional competitiveness starts.
Is that what we're seeing now? A situation where it looks like the federal is pulling more than the state?
That has historically been the case. One of the historic challenges with military rule was that it birthed a strong central government in terms of both state coordination and resource governance. What we've seen since 1999 is a slow, but steady devolution of fiscal. If you remember when governors came back fully running their budgets for the first time in 1999, in fact, I don't think they even knew how to do it.
Okay, but
we've moved systematically from that.
Okay,
out to.
Okay, one other interesting question I have for you has to do with the issue of this tax bill and the budget.
Yeah.
The way from your own analysis, what are you looking at in terms of how the tax bill can affect the budget as we have it now?
So the NESG is a member of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal and Tax Reforms.
Yes.
Well, when we designed the tax bill, the modeling was to solve two problems. One, to get us to tax to GDP of 18%, from the suboptimal place where we were. And the idea was to do it by, one, improving the efficiencies and reducing the complexities. So the multiplicity of taxes, to deal with it at not just federal, but across the 36 states. Number two was to then deal with the institutional architecture that guaranteed that there was clarity, simplicity, and consistency.
And also assist the manufacturing and businesses so that they can...
Because once you do those two things, you create the ease of doing business, even without changing the tax rate. Now, the tax rate then is a question of how much revenue will the new tax system generate today to match the budget versus the order. I think that's why we went into some debates on VAT, the level of VAT, CIT, etc. But here's the more important thing. I think that we wanted the subnationals, when the tax system was reformed, based on the original proposal, to still be able to generate the same amount of money and more from what they will have generated from the multiplicity of taxes and the complexity of the old tax system. What we hear from the political actors is we are unwilling to go in that direction overnight.
We want it phased.
We want it phased. But we need to remind ourselves about one thing, that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to correct what has been the most archaic taxation system, because it has stayed forever. We've never actually had a full. This is the first time in the history of the Republic that we've had a full-blown conversation about our tax system, and so we think that we should allow this go as fast as it needs to go. Now we've seen what the House has passed. The committee has lost a few battles in the House already. I'm hoping with the Senate that some of these forward-looking ideas are things that they think more deeply about. You do need a VAT system to perform at a level where both its distributive potential and its size and its efficiency and the sharing allows Nigeria to do more. And I think what we've proposed is some of that.
Okay.
We had a meeting with the governors, and the governors had proposed an alternative formula, and we think that we can work with that if we still see at least a timed date in the future. So maybe not today.
And hopeful.
Yeah.
And be hopeful that date.
When the date comes up, there's not
everybody will be
front. But by the way, it's just important to note that even if all we made was the normative changes to the tax system, the complexity of the taxes, the number of the taxes, the harmonization of the VAT system, Nigerians already will feel the benefits of that. I mean, if you were paying 72 types of taxes and suddenly you had a well-defined 9 or 4 taxes you were paying and where you pay it was clear to you, your life would automatically be easier, the headaches will be less, right? But we need, because these are federation level reforms, we must win together or we all lose.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been the same for me.
Thank you so much.
That's right.
Well, that is our discussion this week. I hope you got a lot from that. Would like to get your views and comments to the discussion. You can reach out through our social media handles and the email address here. We also have past episodes on our YouTube channel. You can search for News Night under playlist and take your pick. Well, thanks for spending your time with us. Good night.